Hello, here is the video going over the proportions day 2 notes with applications. So example 1, a car can travel 180 miles on 8 gallons of gasoline. How far can this car travel on 20 miles of gasoline? So the fact that the car can travel 180 miles on 8 gallons of gas is going to help us set up our first ratio. So we can write that as the ratio 180 miles for 8 gallons. And what we want to do is we want to set up a proportion. So a proportion is two ratios set equal to each other. So we want to know how far this car can travel on 20 gallons of gasoline. So if I look at my first ratio, the value for gallons is on the bottom. So on my right-hand side, I also need to put the value for gallons on the bottom. I am actually trying to figure out the distance. So I'm going to go ahead and put X up here. And from there, we can do what we did with our other lesson on proportions and cross multiply. So when I take 180 times 20, that is 3,600 equals 8x. And then to undo that multiplication by 8, we can divide both sides by 8, and we get x equals 450. Don't forget your units since we are dealing with an application. We're talking about that distance. So it's 450 miles. All right, example 2. Andy is making lemonade and uses a ratio of powder to water that is 3 scoops to 5 cups. If he uses 12 scoops of powder, how many cups of water should he use? So again, I'm going to set up my first ratio, which is 3 scoops to 5 cups. And I want to see how many cups of water he should use for 12 scoops. So since I had scoops on top on the left, I am also going to put scoops on top on the right. And we don't know the cups of water, so I'm just going to go ahead and put that on X. If you'll notice, when I first set up my first ratio, I always put my units there because that is going to help me figure out what units are going to go on this side, because the same units need to be across from each other. So from here, we can do what we did on the previous example and cross multiply. So that gives me 3 times x equals 5 times 12, which is 60. Divide both sides by 3, and we get x equals 20 cups of water. Okay, so there are 4 practice problems. I'm going to help you set them up, and then you can go through that process of cross-multiplying and continuing to solve. So the scale on a map is 2 centimeters for 18 kilometers. Find the actual distance in kilometers if the distance on the map is 4.5 centimeters. So again, setting up my first ratio, 2 centimeters for 18 kilometers. And we don't know the kilometers, so I'm going to put that as x, and the distance on the map is 4.5 centimeters. And then you can finish this one up. For number 2, a property worth $70,000 has to pay $550 in taxes. How much would you have to pay in taxes on a property worth $245,000? So my first ratio, I'm going to put my dollars for the property worth on top. So it's $70,000 with $550 in taxes. I'm going to make a note over here that the bottom was taxes. So we're trying to figure out your taxes for the other property. So that's going to be our X, and that property is worth $245,000. Cross multiply and solve. If Mr. G types 80 words in 50 seconds, how many words can he type in 130 seconds? So first ratio is 80 words in 50 seconds. We don't know the number of words, so I'm going to write that as X, but we do want to know how many he can type in 130 seconds, and cross multiply. If Carol spent 17 hours in a 2-week period practicing her culinary skills, how many hours does she practice in 5 weeks? So that's 17 hours in 2 weeks. And we want to know how many hours in 5 weeks. And don't forget to actually finish solving these. I just set them up. You need to cross multiply and solve. The next example is just going over percents with proportions once again. I highly recommend you pay attention to the way this is set up. I like to set it up as is over of equals percent over 100, and just paying attention to the way things are worded. So what is 20% of 18? So I don't know what my is, but I do know my of is 18 equals 20% over 100. I can cross multiply, so that leaves me with 100x equals 360. Divide by 100, and I get x equals 3.6. So that means 3.6 is 20% of 18. Letter B, I have my percent. So 45% of what number is 18.3? So I have my is. I don't know my of, but I do have my percent over 100. Cross multiply again. That leaves me with 18.3 times 100 is 183. No, it's not. It's 1,830 equals 45x. And divide both sides by 45. So we get x equals 40.67. So that means if I were to take 45% of 40.67, that would give me that 18.3. Okay, what percent of 120 is 13? So my 13 is the is, 120 is the of. I'm trying to figure out my percent over 100. Cross multiply. That leaves me with 120x equals 1,300. Divide both sides by 120. And we get x equals approximately 10.83. And don't forget your percent symbol, since this one asked for a percent. And letter D, 62% of what number is 85.3? So I have my percent. I don't know the of, but I do know the is. So 85.3 over x equals 62 over 100. And we can cross multiply. That leaves me with 62x equals 8,530. Divide both sides by 62. And I get x equals approximately 137.58. All right, so that concludes our notes for proportions with applications.